Welcome back to the deep dive. Today is Monday, February 9th, 2026. And if you've been glued to your feeds, or honestly just looking out the window, feeling the vibe of the world lately, you know exactly where we
You
are.
can feel it in the air.
You really can. It feels heavy. It feels like the entire planet is holding its breath.
It really does. It's that distinctive, suffocating silence right before a thunderstorm breaks. But we aren't talking about rain, are we? We're talking about a geopolitical shift that it could really redefine the rest of our lives.
We are staring down the barrel of a conflict between the United States and Iran that has moved way past the usual saber rattling. It feels different this time.
It does. We have carrier strike groups maneuvering in ways we haven't seen in decades. We have rhetoric that sounds increasingly final. And everyone from Wall Street to, Main Street is asking the same question.
Is this it? Is this the big one?
And usually, when we sit down to analyze a moment like this, we pull up the standard playbook. We look at Rand Corporation reports, we read foreign affairs, we look at the logistics of fuel depots and troop movements, all the usual stuff.
But today we are doing something very different.
Very different.
We are, because the source material we're unpacking today isn't a dry policy paper from a think tank. It's a manifesto. It's a provocative, multi-layered, and frankly, kind of mind-bending piece of writing.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. It's titled Averting Catastrophe, Geopolitics, Spirituality, and the Path to Peace in the Iran Crisis. And it dropped just this morning on a blog called Barack Face.
Which is a name that demands a bit of explanation right off the bat.
For sure.
The author, a guy named Paramendra Bhagat, he notes that he was Barack Obama's first full-time volunteer in New York City way, way back in the day. So he has these roots in grassroots political organizing. You can see that kind of thinking in his strategic points.
But that's not where he is now.
Not at all. If you look at his recent work, and we are definitely going to get into this later, he has pivoted hard. A complete 180. He's writing about artificial intelligence, future tech, and, crucially for our discussion, ancient Hindu eschatology. End times prophecy.
It is the most eclectic mix we have ever covered on one of these deep dives. We were going to be discussing hard military analysis. I'm talking hypersonic missiles, satellite warfare, the specific physics of sinking an aircraft carrier.
Real nuts and bolts stuff.
And then, in the same breath, this source pivots to the Mahabharata, the nature of the devil, a radical theological critique of Islam, and the literal end times.
It's a dizzying combination, I admit. It can give you a bit of whiplash.
Yeah.
But the central thesis here, if you can hold all those pieces in your head, is fascinating.
What is it in a nutshell?
Bhagat is arguing that you cannot solve the military crisis, the missiles and the ships, without addressing what he sees as the spiritual crisis. He argues they are one and the same mechanism. You can't unplug one without unplugging the other.
Okay, so before we really get into the weeds here, I need to drop a serious disclaimer for everyone listening. This is really important. This source material contains some highly, highly controversial views. The author presents a theological theory about religion, history, and prophecy that is miles away from the mainstream. Our mission here is not to tell you he's right. We aren't endorsing his theology or his politics.
Not in the slightest.
Our job is to unpack his argument. We want to understand how a person connects the price of a barrel of oil to the nature of God, to the Mahabharata. We're trying to see the world through his lens.
Exactly. We're acting as objective reporters on the text. We want to see the world through the author's eyes for the next 100 minutes or so. Because whether you agree with him or not, his perspective highlights risks and connections that standard analysts completely miss. They're just not equipped to even see them.
So let's ground ourselves. Session 1, the geopolitical landscape. February 9, 2026. What does the source say is the actual state of play right now?
The premise is that the specter of conflict is looming larger than it has in, 40 years. Since the revolution, really. But he identifies a specific shift in the escalation ladder that is new, that is different from past crises.
It's not just a bilateral problem anymore.
It's not. It's not just the U.S. versus Iran. He points out that Russia and China are no longer sitting on the sidelines offering, moral support or a veto at the UN. They are actively bolstering Iran with heavy hardware.
And there was one specific detail about Russia's involvement that really stopped me in my tracks. It felt like a headline from a cyberpunk novel, not a geopolitical analysis.
You're talking about the Starlink disruption.
Yes. The source explicitly calls out Russia's role in disrupting Starlink satellites as a visible escalation. What does that really mean in 2026?
Let's pause and unpack why that matters, because it's easy to gloss over satellite disruption. Starlink isn't just about letting people watch Netflix in rural areas. Not anymore. In 2026, Starlink and similar constellations are the nervous system of modern warfare.
The central nervous system.
Absolutely. They handle drone coordination, distributed logistics, encrypted comms for small units in the field. They allow for that networked battlefield we've been hearing about for years. It's the backbone.
So if Russia's messing with that,
If Russia is actively blinding or disrupting those satellites to support Iran, it signals that the battlefield has officially expanded into orbit. It means they are willing to degrade U.S. strategic infrastructure directly, not through a proxy.
it's not a proxy move.
It's a direct move. It's Russia looking the U.S. in the eye and saying, we will blind your eyes, we will cut your nerves. That's an incredibly dangerous step up the ladder.
And while the satellites are going dark, the threats on the water are getting much, much faster. We have to talk about what he calls the hypersonic question.
This is the hardware argument that underpins everything else in the text. This is the physical reality that's forcing this crisis to a head.
The source poses this terrifying question, and he phrases it very simply. Do China and Russia have missiles capable of sinking U.S. aircraft carriers near Iran?
And his answer is just. It's not hedged. There are no caveats. It's just undoubtedly yes.
Undoubtedly. And that one word just kind of upends 70, 80 years of naval strategy, doesn't it?
Oh, completely. The entire post-World War II global order has been projected and maintained by the American Carrier Strike Group. It's the ultimate big stick. You park one of those off someone's coast and, well, they listen.
100,000 tons of diplomacy, as they
Exactly. But if that 100,000 tons is, suddenly a sitting duck, a multi-billion-dollar target that can't defend itself.
To a missile you can't see coming and you can't stop.
Right. And for the listener who might not be a defense nerd, it's worth explaining why a hypersonic missile is so much worse than, say, a regular cruise missile. It's the combination of speed and maneuverability.
It's not just about going fast.
Not at all. A ballistic missile goes up and comes down in a predictable arc. A big, high arc. You can calculate where it will be. You can get a missile defense system to intercept it. A hypersonic glide vehicle, on the other hand, it travels at Mach 5, Mach 10 so, a mile a second or more, but it stays low, within the atmosphere.
It's hugging the Earth.
It's hugging the Earth, and it can turn, it maneuvers. It's like a fighter jet, but at 20 times the speed. So you can't predict where it's going to be.
And that makes it almost impossible to shoot down.
Almost. And because it's moving so fast through the atmosphere, it creates this sheath of plasma around itself, superheated air, that can actually absorb radar waves, making it harder to track. The source is saying, China and Russia have these. They can sink a carrier. The shield is broken.
But the real nightmare scenario, the thing that keeps commanders up at night, is the next question he asks. Does Iran have them?
That's the billion-dollar question. And the force says the evidence is unclear. There are rumors, intelligence chatter, but no smoking gun. But, and this is the key part, Iran claims they have them.
And in the game of deterrence, the claim is almost as powerful as the weapon itself.
It is. Because if you're a commander at the Pentagon and you believe there is even a 10 or 15% chance that Iran has a Russian-supplied Zircon missile that can evade Aegis defenses, you simply cannot park a carrier in the Persian Gulf.
It's suicide. A $10 billion asset with 5,000 lives on it.
You can't risk it. It freezes your options. It forces the U.S. Navy to operate from hundreds, maybe 1,000 miles away, which massively degrades their ability to control the situation, to launch sorties, to project power. It changes the entire map.
But here is the connection that I thought was just brilliant. The source doesn't just leave this as a Middle East problem. He immediately connects this standoff directly to the Pacific. He brings Taiwan into the mix.
This is a very savvy strategic observation. It shows he's thinking globally. The text notes that while U.S. carriers are threatened by these new offensive weapons,
the U.S. has armed Taiwan with similar capabilities, so it's a mirror image.
It is. It's a perfect mirror. The source argues that because Taiwan now possesses its own advanced hypersonic anti-ship missiles, China's massive naval fleet is just as vulnerable in the Taiwan Strait as the American fleet is in the Strait of Hormuz.
He uses a great phrase. He calls China's naval maneuvers around the island increasingly futile.
Futile, because what's the point of having 300 ships if a handful of missiles from shore can sink your most valuable assets before they even get into firing range? It creates this mutual vulnerability.
So we have a global standoff. It's like two guys pointing these incredibly powerful, incredibly fast guns at each other, but the guns are so effective that neither one can risk making a move.
It's a deadlock. It's a state of terrifying paralysis. From the Strait of Hormuz to the Taiwan Strait, offensive technology has outpaced defensive technology. If the shooting starts, the fleets sink. All of them. American, Chinese, doesn't matter.
Which leads us to the consequences. If someone flinches, if a missile flies, if this deadlock breaks, what happens to the rest of us? The source uses a metaphor that is incredibly visceral.
I thought it was perfect.
He calls it a collective heart attack.
A collective heart attack for the global economy. And that's not an exaggeration. A heart attack isn't just a pain in the chest, right? It's a systemic failure. The blood stops moving. The organs start to die.
And he's arguing that a war with Iran isn't just about regional instability. If the Strait of Hormuz closes and a third of the world's seaborne oil goes through there, oil prices don't just tick up.
No. They don't go to $120 a barrel. They go to $200 and $250, maybe $300. The source predicts a total fracture of supply chains.
Yeah.
And remember, in 2026, our supply chains are already tight. We have no slack in the system.
We learned that the hard way over the last few years.
We did. So you're talking about factories shutting down in Germany, trucks unable to fuel up in the U.S., food prices doubling in Asia. He mentions economies from Wall Street to Shanghai reeling.
And this brings up a really interesting point he makes about China. We usually hear about China as the bad guy in this scenario, or the ideological partner to Iran. But the source says, look closer. China is actually a victim in waiting.
This is crucial for understanding the diplomatic angle we'll get to in a minute. China is an export economy. They are the world's factory. They need to move goods out, and they need to move energy in. They are arguably more dependent on Persian Gulf oil than the United States is at this point.
Right. With U.S. shale production, our exposure is lower.
Much lower. So the source argues that China isn't backing Iran because they love the theology of the Ayatollahs. They're backing them to try and manage the chaos, to maintain their energy lifeline. But if a real war breaks out, China's economy suffers a massive stroke. It just stops.
He says we need to stop viewing them solely as authoritarian backers of repression and start viewing them through the lens of shared economic vulnerabilities.
Right. China is terrified of this war. They are terrified of $250 a barrel oil. They are terrified of their shipping lanes closing. And that terror, that shared vulnerability, that's an opportunity. That's the lever you can pull.
Okay, so let's talk about that opportunity. Because the source has a very specific, unconventional plan for how to defuse this bomb. And it involves a group of people we don't usually see leading diplomatic charges.
No, not at all.
The Iranian diaspora.
Right. The Iranians living in Los Angeles, London, Toronto, Paris, the people who fled the regime.
Now, typically, when we see the diaspora on the news, what are they doing? They are marching. They are holding signs that say, down with the dictator. They are lobbying Western governments to impose more sanctions to intervene.
It's a moral appeal. They are shouting, completely justifiably, about human rights, about the oppression of women, about the brutality of the Ayatollahs, and the source says, stop that.
He doesn't say stop caring. He says stop that strategy.
Exactly. He says that strategy is a dead end. He argues that the moral appeal doesn't work on Moscow or Beijing. Vladimir Putin and the CCP leadership, they just do not care about human rights abuses in Tehran. It doesn't move the needle for them 1 inch.
So what's the pivot? What's the new strategy?
The source argues the diaspora should engage Moscow and Beijing directly. Fly to them, talk to them. But the pitch needs to be purely transactional. It needs to be about business. Cold, hard cash.
So instead of help us because we are suffering, it's help us because we can make you rich.
Exactly. The pitch is, the current regime is unstable. They are fanatics. They are unpredictable. They are bad for business. They might start a war that wrecks your economy. But a post-Ayatollah Iran, a free, secular, modern Iran, we are open for business.
That is such a cynical, pragmatic shift. I love it.
It is Realpolitik 101. The source suggests they convinced China that a new Iranian government would welcome Chinese investment, would guarantee oil contracts for 50 years, would be a stable partner for the Belt and Road Initiative. You drive a wedge between the current regime and its great power backers using greed.
You essentially go to China and say, you can have your troublesome, fanatical ally, or you can have a stable, prosperous economic partner that secures your energy future. Pick one.
And you tell them that the diaspora, the educated, Western-oriented Iranians abroad, are the key to unlocking that stable future.
Yeah.
It's a very sophisticated approach. It bypasses the West entirely and speaks to Russia and China in the only language they truly understand: self-interest.
And speaking of bypassing the West, the source also suggests a very specific and crucial role for Russia in the actual de-escalation negotiations. He calls this the agenda-setting phase.
This is the classic Nixon goes to China logic, but flipped on its head. The core argument is that Iran will never, ever, ever listen to a proposal from Washington or Tel Aviv.
Because there's no trust. Decades of bad blood.
Zero trust. The source says those proposals are always seen as unreasonable or laced with historical grievances. If the U.S. says disarm, Iran hears surrender to the great Satan. It's a non-starter.
But Russia...
Russia's different. Russia is a fellow non-Western power. Russia is a partner, an ally who sells them weapons. The source argues that Russia is the only power on Earth that can deliver the hard news to Tehran without it being immediately rejected.
So Putin, or his foreign minister, goes to the Ayatollah and says, what? What's the message?
He delivers a firm, unequivocal no to nuclear weapons. He says, you cannot build the bomb, period, because it will cause a regional war that will destabilize everything and ruin my interests too. But, and this is the genius of it, he couples that prohibition with an offer.
The carrot.
The carrot. He offers a guarantee of Russian-supplied fuel for civilian nuclear energy. So it's no nukes, but yes energy.
And it's guaranteed by a friend, not an enemy.
Precisely. It emphasizes mutual security over dominance.
Yeah.
It gives Iran a face-saving way to back down. They aren't surrendering to the great Satan. They are making a pragmatic deal with a strategic partner to secure their energy needs. It reframes the entire problem.
And the source is optimistic that this could actually work.
He is. He talks about a domino effect of peace.
Mm-hmm.
He believes if you can solve the immediate nuclear issue via this Russian channel, you prevent the war. You stop the collective heart attack.
Right.
And once the global temperature drops, you can slowly, carefully bring the other players, the U.S., Israel, the Gulf states, even Palestinian representatives, back to the table to build trust incrementally on other issues.
It sounds so logical. It's a perfect puzzle of rational actors acting rationally to save their own skins and their own economies.
It does. It's the kind of clear-eyed analysis you'd expect from a very high-level diplomat or a Kissinger-esque strategist.
And then we turn the page in his manifesto.
And we turn the page.
And we leave the world of rational actors completely, totally behind. Because the source argues that all of this, the diplomacy, the Russian fuel deals, the economic leverage, it's all just a Band-Aid.
A Band-Aid on a gaping, infected wound.
Yes. This is where the deep dive gets really deep. The source explicitly states that true, lasting resolution demands confronting deeper undercurrents. And he identifies the ultimate agenda item not as nuclear enrichment levels, but as Islam itself.
Yeah, this is the pivot that will lose a lot of mainstream readers, but it's central to his entire argument.
Okay, we need to slow down here and be incredibly precise with the language. The author is making a theological argument that is going to sound shocking and probably offensive to a lot of people. He calls Islam an anti-religion.
He does. And he doesn't use that term lightly or as an insult. He frames it as a technical term in his own cosmology. He frames the faith not as a cultural tradition or as one of many paths to God, but as a deception orchestrated by dark forces.
Dark forces. He's being literal here. He is talking about the devil or Satan or some equivalent force of cosmic evil.
He is completely literal about it. The source outlines what he sees as a mechanism, a specific spiritual trap. He argues that the devil, or the force of evil, easily captured atheists by simply denying that God exists. That's the low-hanging fruit.
Right. If you don't believe in the spiritual plane at all, you're off the board. You're not a threat.
Right. But what about the billions of people who do have a spiritual hunger? The people who want to submit to a higher power, who yearn for a connection to the divine? The source argues that the devil needed a much more sophisticated trap for them.
So the argument is that Islam was engineered to capture that very devotion, to redirect it.
That is the core of his theological thesis. He argues that it takes that sincere, powerful human desire for God and redirects it into a system that is actually opposed to the divine nature. He makes some very specific critiques of the Quranic depiction of Allah. He argues that this specific version of God lacks the omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence of a true divine entity.
And he focuses heavily on the psychology of it, the theme of obedience.
The tyranny of blind obedience. He describes the faith's core command as obey, obey, obey. He contrasts this with what he considers true spirituality, which he implies is about direct connection, love, critical inquiry, and enlightenment. He sees the submission aspect of Islam not as holy devotion, but as a spiritual prison.
And he doesn't stop at the theology. He goes after the history itself. He makes the bold claim that historical scrutiny suggests no verifiable Muhammad existed as depicted.
Which is a reference to a very fringe school of historical revisionism, sometimes called the non-existence hypothesis or the Hagerism school. It's not mainstream scholarship at all. But the author isn't just citing it as an interesting historical fact. He's using it to attempt to strip the religion of its foundational legitimacy. He calls the faith fabricated from top to bottom.
But, and this is probably the most critical distinction if we want to understand his worldview, he takes great pains to separate the system from the people trapped within it.
Yes, he is very, very clear on this. He writes, and I'm quoting here, Muslims, in this view, are not inherently evil but deceived. He acknowledges that millions, probably billions of people within the faith are good, charitable, decent people seeking God.
He's not demonizing the believer.
Not at all. He's trying to diagnose what he sees as a faulty operating system. He points to the protesters in Iran, the women taking off their hijabs, the youth risking execution for freedom, as proof that the human spirit is actively fighting against the system.
So he sees them as victims of the software, not the authors of it.
Exactly. He sees them as hostages in what he calls spiritual bondage.
Okay, let's connect this back to the aircraft carriers. Why does this incredibly abstract theological theory matter for a potential war in 2026?
Because of what he calls the logic of annihilation. The source argues that this specific spiritual worldview, this anti-religion as he terms it, has a core non-negotiable mandate embedded in its code. Unwavering hostility toward Israel.
But lots of nations have hostilities. Rivalries are common.
He argues this is different. It's not about territory or resources or political disagreements. He argues it is about the end of Israel, the complete erasure of it from the map. And this is where the nuclear aspect becomes so terrifying.
Standard deterrence theory, the idea of mutually assured destruction, I won't nuke you because you'll nuke me back, it relies on the idea that both sides want to live.
Precisely. It relies on rational self-preservation. But the source argues that if you are operating on this anti-religion software, as he calls it, and you believe that your own destruction in a holy war is actually a martyrdom that fulfills a divine command and guarantees you paradise, then deterrence fails.
There is no hesitation.
That's the chilling phrase he uses. A bomb in the hands of this specific theology invites no hesitation. How can you negotiate with someone who sees your very existence as an affront to their God and their own death in battle as the ultimate victory?
You can't. The negotiating table is meaningless. So as long as the regime in Iran holds this specific theology, the source believes no treaty, no agreement is worth the paper it's printed on.
Correct. You can sign the deal, you could ship the Russian fuel, you can have 100 photo ops, but the undercurrent, as he calls it, remains. The drive for annihilation remains, just waiting for another opportunity.
So his proposed solution is, it's massive. It's not a policy prescription.
It's monumental. He calls for the Iranian diaspora to lead a theological reformation. He wants them to start saying, the emperor has no clothes. To go to their countrymen via satellite TV, via the internet, and say, we have been deceived. This religion is a trap. Let us help you find your way back to true, direct spirituality.
He wants to dismantle the regime's spiritual legitimacy from the inside out.
Which he views as the only permanent solution. Everything else, the diplomacy, the sanctions, it's all just stalling for time.
And if that wasn't heavy enough, he then zooms out even further. He frames all of this, the war, the theology, the politics, within a timeline that spans not decades, but thousands of years. He introduces a cyclical view of history.
This is where we get deep into the Hindu scriptures. The source draws heavily on the Vedic concept of yugas, these vast cosmic ages that cycle through time.
He talks about the Mahabharata. Now, most of our listeners probably know that as an epic poem from India, a myth with gods and heroes.
But the source views it as history. He calls it a historical account of the previous age, the Dvapara Yuga. And how did that age end? It ended in the apocalyptic war at Kurukshetra, a massive catastrophic war that wiped out almost everyone and reset the world.
And the Ramayana before that, the Treta Yuga.
Also ended in a great conflict. The source is pointing out a pattern. Civilizations rise, they develop incredible technologies and powers, they lose their spiritual way, and then they destroy themselves to clear the slate for the next age.
And he looks at our world in 2026 with our hypersonic missiles and our simmering conflicts, and he says,
if patterns hold, our era may follow suit. He isn't subtle about it. He explicitly declares, these are the end times.
That is a chilling phrase, end times. It sounds so final.
It is. But he doesn't seem to mean it in the Hollywood sense of the world exploding and the credits rolling.
Yeah.
He means a phase shift, a transition. He says religions of this age will dissolve. He predicts that in the new era that's coming, spiritual capacities will multiply. It's an upgrade, but the upgrade process is brutal.
I loved the physics analogy he used here. It really helped me grasp what he was trying to say about the different scriptures.
The Newton versus Einstein comparison?
Yeah, it was so clear.
It's a brilliant analogy. He compares the Bible to Newton's gravity. Newtonian physics is useful. It works. It's a great approximation of reality. It keeps bridges from falling down. It lets you send a rocket to the moon. It points you in the right direction. The source says the Bible is like that, a foundational guide pointing to God and Jesus.
But then he compares Sanatana Dharma, what we call Hinduism, to Einstein's theory of relativity.
Exactly. Einstein didn't prove Newton wrong, per se, but he showed that there was a much deeper, more complex, more fundamental reality underneath it all. Relativity explains the fabric of space-time itself. The source argues that Sanatana Dharma offers those deeper insights into the nature of consciousness, reincarnation, and the cosmos.
But the goal isn't just to read the books, to switch from Newton's book to Einstein's book.
No, absolutely not. He's very clear. He says the scriptures are just directions. Once found, set them aside and attune to God directly. He's advocating for a mystical, direct, personal connection to the divine. He thinks the texts are just maps. Once you arrive at the destination, you don't need to keep staring at the map anymore.
And he thinks this is where a power like the Chinese Communist Party fails completely. They have a total blind spot to this entire dimension of reality.
A materialistic blind spot. It's a great phrase. The CCP looks at the world and sees resources, later capital infrastructure. That's it. He gives the example of their stance on the Dalai Lama.
What? The committee decision. It's almost absurd.
It is funny, but it's tragic in his view. The CCP claims they, an officially atheist government body, have the right to appoint the next Dalai Lama via a government committee. The source says this proves they fundamentally misunderstand the nature of the soul. They think reincarnation is a job title you can assign, not a soul's sacred journey.
And because they don't get the spiritual side, the software.
They can't possibly grasp the Middle East. They're trying to solve a spiritual war with material tools. They think if they just build enough roads through the Belt and Road Initiative or buy enough oil, the problem will go away. They don't understand that for an anti-religion believer, as he calls them, the roads and the money don't matter compared to the divine mandate for annihilation. They're speaking a different language.
We have to pause and talk about the guy writing this, because this mix, hypersonic missiles, the devil, the Mahabharata, agentic AI, it is truly unique. We took a look at the sidebar of his blog to try and figure out who is Paramendra Bhagat, and the book titles there are, well, they're telling.
They tell a whole story on their own. It's like a map of his brain laid out for you.
We see titles like Calculism, the economic and spiritual blueprint for an age of abundance, and The Last Age, Lord Kalki, Prophecy, and the Final War for Peace.
So Kalki is the key here. For anyone unfamiliar, in Hindu eschatology, Kalki is the final avatar of the god Vishnu. He is the warrior who appears on a white horse at the very end of the Kali Yuga, which is the current age of darkness and corruption, to destroy evil and restart the cycle of time.
So when the author talks about the end times, he's operating from this very specific Kalkist framework. He believes we're living in the final turbulent days of the Kali Yuga, right before the reset.
Exactly. He sees himself as a sort of herald for this transition. But then, right next to the prophecy books, look at the other titles. The Country of Geniuses, a race through AI adolescence, and agentic AI set to explode in 2026.
He's a tech futurist, too. It's not just ancient scriptures.
He is deeply embedded in the 2026 tech zeitgeist. He's clearly following the AI space very closely. He sees AI and spirituality not as separate fields, but as converging lines. He has another book called Liquid Computing and another called The Dawn Beyond Currency.
So his vision of the new era, the Satya Yuga that comes after the war, isn't just everyone going back to pre-industrial life and meditating. It's a post-economic, high-tech, spiritually awakened world.
It seems like he views the end times not just as a destructive war, but as a technological and spiritual transcendence. A singularity moment where our AI explodes in capability and our human spiritual capacity explodes at the same time. He thinks we're about to level up as a species, but the process is going to be incredibly painful.
And we can't ignore the Nepal connection in his work. He has books on Nepal's path to prosperity through Kalkiism and something called the Great Subcontinent Uprising,
which grounds his geopolitical perspective in South Asia. It explains why he references Pakistan, India, and the Sanatana Dharma framework so heavily. He's not looking at the world from a think tank in D.C. or London. He's looking at it from the Himalayas out. It's a completely different vantage point.
So bringing it all back to the immediate crisis, February 9th, 2026. The missiles are ready, the fleets are in position. The author believes we are prophetically destined for a cleansing war. The yugas are turning, but, and this is a big but, and this is a big but, he still argues we have to try to stop it.
That is the moral imperative, and it's a very important nuance in his philosophy. A lot of people who believe in end times prophecies become fatalistic. They say, well, it's written in the book, so just let it burn. Nothing we can do.
But Haggott doesn't say that. Not at all.
No. He argues that human beings have free will and a moral duty to act. He says evil transcends religion. He brings up the grooming gangs in the UK, the Epstein scandals. He uses these as proof that evil is an active, predatory, non-sectarian force in the world. And therefore, goodness demands an active and forceful response.
So we can't just throw up our hands and wait for the prophecy to unfold.
He says every effort must be made. Even if the age must end, maybe it doesn't have to end in total fire. Maybe our efforts, our choices can soften the landing. Maybe we can save more people. The outcome might be set, but the path to it is not.
So what are his concrete action items? If he was in the Oval Office or in the Forbidden City, what is he telling them to do right now, today?
Okay, so he boils it down to a few key points. First, for the great powers, the U.S., China, and Russia, engage in direct, honest dialogue now. Ignore the proxies. Don't waste time talking to Iran's foreign minister. Talk to each other. Sit down and de-escalate via raw economic pragmatism. He wants the U.S. to remind China exactly how many trillions of dollars they will lose in a global shutdown. Remind Russia that a nuclear exchange in the Middle East helps absolutely no one.
Use their fear.
Use their fear of economic collapse. To the Iranian diaspora. Change the message. He's bugging them. Stop just shouting regime change and inhuman rights at Western audiences. Start a theological dialogue with your own people. He says, and this is a direct quote, liberty cannot flourish without clarity on Islam's tyrannical essence. He wants them to engage the Iranian people in a massive open conversation about the nature of God, to try and break the spell from within.
That is a long, difficult game.
It is. It's a generational battle for hearts and minds. But he views it as the only game that actually matters in the long run.
And finally, to Israel.
He has a very somber note for Israel. He questions if their opportunity for optimal action was actually 6 months ago, when their strategic leverage was higher. He implies the window for a clean, decisive action might be closing or already closed, and their position is becoming more precarious by the day.
But if war comes, if the dialogue fails, if the end-time script plays out as he fears it might, what then?
Then his tone shifts completely. He's not a pacifist. He becomes very martial. He says the forces of good must act with valor, clarity, skill, and resources. If the fight starts, he wants the good side to win, and to win decisively, in order to minimize the total amount of suffering and chaos. He invokes the spirit of the Mahabharata war is a terrible, terrible failure, but sometimes it is the dharma, the duty of the righteous, to fight and win.
It is a fascinating, terrifying, and strangely hopeful vision all at once. A world where he pleads for dialogue to triumph over destruction, but where the threat of total annihilation is just one button push away.
And where the ultimate battlefield isn't just the Persian Gulf or the Taiwan Strait, but the human soul, the internal landscape.
That really is the final takeaway, isn't it? Whether you buy the theology or not, whether you believe in Kalki or the Yugas or the anti-religion theory, the source makes a compelling argument that in 2026 you cannot separate the spiritual from the geopolitical.
You really can't. The motivations of the key players, the rhetoric they use, the willingness to die for a cause, it's all rooted in these deep, ancient beliefs and prophecies. If you try to solve it with just spreadsheets and satellite photos and economic models, you're missing the biggest piece of the puzzle.
You're looking at the hardware and completely ignoring the software that's running it.
Perfectly put.
And here's a final thought to leave you with, something the source mentioned that really stuck with me as I was reading this morning. He said that in this new era, this coming Satya Yuga, spiritual capacities will multiply.
Yes, that's the promise at the end of all the turmoil.
If he is right even a little bit about this end times transition, are we looking at a conflict that is fought not just with hypersonic missiles and AI drones, but with a fundamental shift in human consciousness itself? And with his heavy focus on AI, where does artificial intelligence fit into that spiritual multiplication?
Is AI the tool that unlocks that capacity? Or is it the final trap? Are we building gods, or are we about to meet them?
That might just be the question of the century. Something to mull over while you watch the headlines. We'll be tracking the situation as it develops. Stay safe out there and stay curious. Thanks for listening.